When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
Now, if Big Pharma tries to raise drug prices faster than inflation, they'll be penalized.
The House January 6th committee has postponed tomorrow's hearing.
While Stone had inspired or incited all these people to come to D.C. believing that they could actually change the outcome, he had long given up on that hope.
That was the filmmaker of a new documentary about Roger Stone ahead of what was supposed to be a hearing of the January 6th committee tomorrow. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Ed O'Keefe, coming to you from CBS News in Washington. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with the January 6th committee. The House panel has postponed a hearing originally scheduled for tomorrow. The committee says the postponement is in response to Hurricane Ian, which is expected to hit the west coast of Florida late Wednesday night. It also said they will announce soon a new date for the hearing. We're joined tonight by two of my colleagues. Congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is on Capitol Hill, and political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is in Raleigh, North Carolina, out on the campaign trail. Scott, I want to begin with you because there's been a bit of activity there this afternoon. Just in the last 2 hours or so, we've learned they're postponing this hearing. Is this about losing the headline space to a storm, or is there something else afoot that's causing the members of this committee to rethink whether it made sense to hold a hearing tomorrow?
Well, Ed, in their statement announcing the postponement, they were quite clear. This is in respect to the hurricane hitting. At about the same moment, they were supposed to gavel in this hearing. That is not a type of side-by-side image you want to have if you're a congressional committee. They postponed it, but they haven't announced a date certain for the new hearing. This was potentially the finale from this committee, a long-awaited finale. We'll have to wait a bit while longer. Here's the thing, though. There's a very narrow space in which to try to reschedule this hearing. We're, at this moment, 6 weeks out from the midterm elections. This committee expires at the end of the calendar year. This is a very narrow needle they'll have to thread to get this thing back on the calendar, and there's no certainty they can.
And again, I mean, understandable with the storm, especially given that one of the members, at least one of the members, Stephanie Murphy's from Florida, and her district potentially in the path of at least the remnants of this. But it does seem interesting that in the last few days, members of this committee at least have been a little quieter than they've been ahead of other hearings, trying to give us a sense of what was coming. Was there a sense that they perhaps didn't quite know what they wanted to do yet, or were they set on a plan and they just have to wait?
That's an interesting question because we really don't know what's been postponed because there was no roadmap or order of show for this hearing. So we don't know what we're not getting tomorrow. That's not characteristic of this committee. Usually they have a plan that they've announced days in advance, a witness list, or a sense of the theme or focus of this hearing. They didn't have one. When we spoke to committee members late last week, we asked them for it. They still didn't have one, perhaps making it easier to pull the trigger on a delay because we don't know what they've delayed. All that being said, there was a different calculus potentially to this hearing, Ed, because it had the potential of being the last one, raising the stakes, but also raising the threshold of how they get everything in. This really was potentially a last vehicle through which to show their work, show what they've found, report out some of the hundreds of interviews they've done and the thousands of documents they've collected, including all the interviews done and all the documents collected since the last time we saw this committee weeks ago.
You spoke this afternoon with the director and producer of a documentary about Roger Stone. One thing that we do think was set to be included in this hearing, correct?
Yeah, we figured out some of what was going to be in tomorrow's hearing through our reporting. We spoke with the Danish documentarian whose forthcoming movie, this committee subpoenaed. And the documentarian told us there was an expectation they'd show a clip of it tomorrow at the hearing. This is a documentary about, among other things, Roger Stone. Roger Stone on and before election night 2020. Let me let the filmmaker tell you a little bit more. You shared some of your recording with the House January 6th Select Committee. Could you tell what part of this they were interested in?
Yes, I mean, their focus was, it was pretty clear from the get-go. Their focus was the connections between Roger Stone, the Oath Keepers, and the Proud Boys. That is, the groups that were spearheading the attacks on January 6th.
And there are those names again. We keep hearing them in the January 6th Select Committee's investigation. Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, investigating whether there's a nexus between those groups and Roger Stone, somebody who was in the former president's orbit. We know from the court cases involving the Oath Keepers that, according to the prosecutors, the Oath Keepers exchanged messages while here at the Capitol January 6th or ahead of January 6th about the possibility of providing protection, security for Roger Stone. That was one trajectory of this committee hearing tomorrow. But again, we don't know what else they had planned.
And haven't there been some legal developments with the Oath Keepers, Scott?
Yeah, one would say that. Their trial began this morning. Jury selection for the first 5 accused Oath Keeper seditious conspirators to go on trial. That includes the founder, perhaps the best known of this group, Stewart Rhodes, facing the highest level charges because it is a charge of seditious conspiracy. They're accused of not just coming here January 6th, but of coming here with a plan to disrupt the Congress, block the peaceful transfer of power, help breach security violently, and stage guns outside the city limits for the possibility the former president invoked the Insurrection Act. This jury selection itself will take days, longer than most cases. The trial itself could take weeks, longer than most cases, and it just started today.
Caitlin, to you now on the campaign trail. I don't know about you, but I've found in my midterm year travels that the farther you get from Washington, the less urgency maybe there is, or even familiarity with the ebbs and flows of what went on in Washington, as important and as profound as it is. You had a chance today to speak with one of the candidates in the U.S. Senate contest down there. Tell us a little more, and whether this issue resonates at all.
Yeah, Ed, that's exactly right. We've been wondering, how does this all play into these big key races? Are voters paying attention to the everyday kind of incremental progress that we've seen the committee make? It was really interesting because I asked Sherry Beasley, who is the Democratic Senate candidate running for an open seat here in North Carolina. It's a seat being vacated by a Republican. And she actually said that she is hearing a little bit about this from voters, kind of under the umbrella about democracy, which we've kind of seen reflected in our polling. Take a listen to what she had to say. Are you hearing a lot from voters about January 6th, about the former president's involvement? Is that something that comes up on the campaign trail?
What people are concerned about is that my opponent was in Congress on January 6th, that he caused the mob that stormed the Capitol and put our law enforcement's lives in danger, patriots. They're concerned about the fact that he's an election denier and he's spreading the big lie. They're concerned about the fact that when he's asked now by media whether or not he will accept the results of the 2022 election in November, he will not respond. We need a senator who understands that a free and fair democracy is a part of the foundation of who we are as North Carolinians and as Americans. And I can tell you, I will accept the results of the November 2022 election, and that's what people here in North Carolina want.
Now, she's referring to Congressman Ted Budd, who is her Republican opponent there. And I should note that on January 7th, he did release a statement condemning the attack, but also he voted against certifying the results of the election. And he said that he supported an orderly transition of power, but had questions about the way the election was conducted. So here's an example, a more specific example of a way a Democrat is using this on the campaign. And we've seen Democrats here in the state ahead of former President Trump coming to the state over the weekend here, put a billboard up connecting Budd to statements on January 6th. What's interesting, though, in this race is that Budd is not backing away from Donald Trump at all. He got his endorsement in the primary, which helped boost his showing in that primary and helped earn him the nomination for the Republicans. And he also campaigned with former President Trump on the stage here in North Carolina on Friday night. And the calculus from the campaign is that they need to turn out Republican-based voters. So if Trump can come to a state like this one, even though there are all these investigations going on, even though we have all of this information from various things that we've learned from the committee, that, you know, the benefit is getting a big turnout from your base, which could matter, especially in a state like North Carolina, where Trump won, even narrowly, but still won. So it's really interesting to kind of see how this is all playing out. But, you know, I'd remind people that the top issue that we're seeing in polling across the country, and especially these battleground states, is that inflation and the economy remain top of mind. And so when you're going to the ballot box, you know, that's likely what you're going to be thinking about. And then, of course, increasingly, the issue of abortion access for some voters.
Right, and it's become a big issue there. But it is interesting to see Beasley double down on the January 6th stuff when other Democrats have run for it by making the point that he was an enabler, in essence, by voting to support this. Scott, I got to turn back to you real quick because there have been some developments there on the Hill today regarding whether or not the government will shut down. And just a little while ago, Senator Joe Manchin announced he's pulling out of the spending bill, a key thing he wanted done in order to get his support for the Inflation Reduction Act. It's this permitting, this new law that would make getting energy projects permitted faster. He's yanking it out amid Republican opposition. Does that make passing this spending bill now faster and easier ahead of Friday's deadline?
I didn't see a circumstance in which they'd let the government shut down 6 weeks ahead of the midterm elections. Neither side would have benefited from that. This was the last variable, this permitting reform proposal, which would help launch energy projects, especially in West Virginia. And so Joe Manchin was pushing for it, but he has pulled back, recognizing it's not going to pass. It wasn't going to get bipartisan support, not the sufficient amount of support to make it part of this bill to keep the government open. So it appears the government is on a trajectory to remain open till after the election, when we fight this battle again in December.
All right, well, that storm may pass. We'll watch the other one, and we appreciate you both, Scott McFarland and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thank you. President Biden cancels his trip to Florida today because of Hurricane Ian, but he still made a pitch to voters, touting his administration's accomplishments in the final stretch to November. I'll talk to a member of his West Wing staff next. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm here for you. Take an orange?
Yes.
You do? Here.
America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing? Beyond this gate is actually the border with Ukraine. We've seen people not just opening their hearts to Ukrainian refugees, but their homes. Where will you go?
Nobody says it like Gail.
If we can't talk about it and we can't make changes, when can we talk about it?
Gail King, CBS Mornings. Everything your morning should be.
When weather turns extreme,
The 150-mile-per-hour hurricane is still churning north.
every second counts.
Massive and rapidly intensifying.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Well over 9 feet. This is not survivable.
You'll have time to get prepared.
You want to have the advantage on severe weather days.
It just may save your life.
CBS News and extreme weather. Feel the forecast.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
$158 House Republicans have already signed a Republican budget that will cut Medicare and Social Security. I know you think I'm probably exaggerating that, but there's a pamphlet, 12-point plan to rescue America by Senator Scott of Florida, okay? I won't read through all of it, but it says, all federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. If it is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. Translated, if you don't vote to keep it, you don't get it.
That was President Biden today taking on Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida, chair of the Senate Republicans' campaign arm. Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Ed O'Keefe. The president was supposed to be in Florida campaigning today, but instead touted his administration's recent work to lower Medicare costs and other costs in the Rose Garden as Democrats try to convince voters they're doing enough to fight inflation. I want to bring in White House Principal Deputy Communications Director Kate Berner. Kate, great to see you. With 6 weeks to go now until Election Day, the president today spending some time pointing out that he's going to be saving a good number of Americans a considerable amount of money, about $60, well, either way, Medicare Part B costs are going to be going down for most beneficiaries. How is that going to happen? And it's happening next year. Why can't it happen sooner?
So thanks for having me, Ed. It's great to be here with you. So you are right. The president announced today that Medicare premiums will decrease next year. They'll decrease by $60 a year. So everyone on Medicare Part D, as you mentioned, will pay $60 less a year on their premiums. This is an important way to give families more money back in their pockets. It's one of the only times that premiums have decreased year over year. So the Department of Health and Human Services announced it earlier today. But this is just the latest action that the administration has taken to make health care and prescription drugs more affordable for seniors and families all across the country. The American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act lowered millions of families' health care premiums. Again, that's the money they pay every month for their insurance, and it's lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, capping the amount of money they spend out of pocket every year at $2,000. So that's significant breathing room for families that they'll have every month back in their household budgets.
But again, this doesn't kick in until next year, right?
Yeah, but Ed, this is a really important progress for family to get more money back in their pockets. And as the president said today, let's contrast that with Republican and Congress's approach. Their approach is to put Medicare and Social Security on the chopping block. Senator Scott wants to put it on the chopping block every 5 years. Senator Johnson every year. House Republicans doubled down on this last week in their commitment to America. So President Biden is making health care and prescription drugs more affordable for seniors and Americans of all ages. And Republicans in Congress are threatening these programs that, as the president said this afternoon, millions of Americans have already paid into.
I had a feeling you would invoke what Republicans are proposing or perhaps not supporting. And The president himself did that today, brandishing a bit of what Rick Scott is proposing, among other things, the idea that every few years there should be a revote to reauthorize certain programs like Medicare. The president suggesting that could mean it would end as we know it. That's typical election year, especially fall of an election year contrast, one party doing one thing, the other doing the other. Our polling, and the polling of others, though, continues to show most Americans would prefer to see Republicans or approve of the way Republicans would run the economy over you guys. Are these contrasts, you think, breaking through and doing what they need to do to convince voters otherwise?
Well, look, Ed, you know I can't get too much into politics here on the North Lawn because of the Hatch Act. I think that there is an important message for the president to keep making, for the president to keep reminding Americans all across the country what we have done. The president has passed legislation that reduce families' health care costs, reduce families' prescription drug costs. Their Medicare premiums, as you said, will go down by $60 next year. We're creating millions of jobs. And to contrast that with the approach of congressional Republicans, which is to overturn, to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, giving into big pharma, getting rid of the out-of-pocket cap on your prescription drug costs, making energy costs go up even more. So we think this is an important contrast, and I'd point you asked about polling. These proposals, the Inflation Reduction Act, poll extraordinarily well across the spectrum of Americans. People like what the president and congressional Democrats have accomplished. They don't like what congressional Republicans are proposing. So we're going to go out and keep making our case and keep talking about the important work that we've undertaken for the American people.
This was an event today that was supposed to happen in Florida. The trip was postponed for obvious and understandable reasons because of the approaching hurricane. But it's another example of a president who, for a variety of reasons outside of anyone's control, has been unable to get out on the road. How frustrating is that to him, to you guys who try to arrange for these trips to happen? And will we see him somehow get to Florida before Election Day?
Well, look, Ed, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Florida who are preparing for Hurricane Ian. The president spoke to 3 mayors today in Florida, the mayor of Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Clearwater. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell was down in Miami yesterday helping pre-possession resources and making sure that evacuation orders were underway. So our primary focus and our primary concern today was not about a trip needing to get rescheduled, but making sure that families in the Sunshine State are going to be safe and going to get through this storm with the support of the administration and everything we can do to help.
But he has upcoming travel planned, right?
Of course. The president will be out on the road in the next few weeks. I'm not going to preview any of those at this point. But today,
but you're welcome to.
We're not going to give out any new pieces of the schedule just now. But I would, if you're watching this from all across the country, I would expect to see the president visiting you and your communities soon.
You mentioned 3 mayors that the president called today. Is he going to call the governor?
Again, I don't have any calls to read out or preview for you. I know the FEMA administrator spoke to Governor DeSantis the end of last week. The president pre-approved the disaster declaration for the state of Florida. We've made clear anything that state and local elected officials in Florida need as they go through this hurricane. We are here and we will provide and work with them to ensure that Floridians are safe through Hurricane Ian.
Can I ask you a real quick one on student loans, the forgiveness of student loans, which I know has been a top priority for the White House. There is now a lawsuit filed in a district court in Indiana that suggests the administration has gone beyond its powers to give forgiveness to those eligible students. I know this is something the White House has anticipated would come. Your reaction to the lawsuit, if there is one, and are you confident, the administration, that it can withstand legal challenge?
Yes. So we are confident that the president's plan can withstand legal challenge. This particular lawsuit that you mentioned, Ed, I think is based on this idea that folks can't opt out of getting student debt forgiveness, which is just totally wrong. This is a baseless claim. If you don't want to have your student debt forgiven, you'll be able to opt out. You won't be forced to have $10,000 of your loans forgiven. So this is a baseless claim. The president took this action so that millions of families who need a little bit extra breathing room, who are struggling to buy a house or start a business, could have their loans forgiven. We think this will be important for those families and individuals who've been struggling with student debt. and we think this will be important for our economy.
I'd like to meet the people who will opt out of this, because it's interesting.
Turns out in this suit, they say he wants to opt out, so we'll make sure that he can avail himself of that.
All right, we'll see. White House Principal Deputy Communications Director Kate Berner, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As Hurricane Ian threatens to make devastating landfall in Florida, natural disasters are always a big test for governors. We'll have more on that next. We're streaming Red and Blue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm here for you.
Take an orange?
Yes.
You do? Here. America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing? Beyond this gate is actually the border with Ukraine. We've seen people not just opening their hearts to Ukrainian refugees, but their homes. Where will you go?
Nobody says it like Gail.
If we can't talk about it and we can't make changes, when can we talk about it?
Gail King, CBS Mornings. Everything your morning should be.
When weather turns extreme,
The 150-mile-per-hour hurricane is still churning north.
every second counts.
Massive and rapidly intensifying.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Well over 9 feet. This is not survivable.
You'll have time to get prepared.
You want to have the advantage on severe weather days.
It just may save your life.
CBS News and extreme weather. Feel the forecast.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
When you have 5 to 10 feet of storm surge, that is not something that you want to be a part of. And Mother Nature is a very fearsome adversary. So please heed those warnings. You do not need to evacuate to another state. You don't need to go hundreds of miles away. There's shelters that are open in all of these counties at this point.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. That was Republican Governor Ron DeSantis on the state's preparations for Hurricane Ian's landfall in Florida. Residents of the Sunshine State are bracing for a slow-moving and intensifying storm that could create deadly storm surge along the Florida Gulf Coast. And much of our focus will be on the potential for loss of life and damage to highly populated areas. But let's say what many in the political world are also thinking privately. Natural disasters are a testing ground for leaders at the local, state, and federal levels, and hurricanes especially give Florida governors a unique opportunity to demonstrate leadership in the face of crisis. Through the years, it's helped bolster the national profiles of past governors, including Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, and Rick Scott. And when it comes to hurricanes, the peak season often coincides with peak campaign season. We all remember New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's literal and figurative embrace of former President Obama during Superstorm Sandy, a moment of bipartisanship in the final stretch of the 2012 campaign. As Florida Governor, DeSantis isn't a stranger to hurricane prep, but since he was elected governor in 2018, the state's been mostly spared of major storms. Political watchers will be looking to see how he navigates working with the Biden administration, which has already made a disaster declaration for Hurricane Ian, and it's yet another opportunity for the possible 2024 hopeful to raise his national profile. And they'll be watching the current president to see how he and his team interact with the governors, and what could end up being a preview of things to come. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue. To Tallahassee, Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis is discussing hurricane preparations. Let's watch.